with. So what's up guys, I thought I would do another video this afternoon or this evening talking about the England national team. And what I think their chances of winning the Euros or winning the World Cup next year. Well, for me personally, I look at the England national team and I look at the England national team. I certainly don't think we're ready for the tournament. I think obviously we're certainly not at a level where we can compete with some of the bigger teams in the tournament. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done before we're able to we're at that level where we can compete with the likes of France, Portugal, Germany, Spain. You know, and obviously Argentina, those big teams that are going to be at the World Cup next year. I think we'll definitely qualify. I don't see how we can't. When you look at the group that we have for the tournament, we should without a doubt quite easily get out of that group. I think for England, I look at Thomas Tuchel. I'd love nothing more than to be able to say with all confidence and all certainty that I think, he's gonna win. He's gonna win the World Cup with England next year. But I think you have to be very cautious going into that tournament. England. I'm not completely dismissing England's chances, but I'm gonna say, for me, I've always said that the World Cup is a lot more difficult and is a completely different ball game to the Euros. Obviously there is obviously a hell of a lot of work that needs to be done over the next 15 months to make sure, to ensure that England are ready for the next tournament, are ready for are ready for the next tour, obviously for the World Cup next year. We might be ready, we might not be ready. I just don't really know. I think at the moment, I think it's very hard to, just to kind of certify that we will be ready for the tournament next year. When I think back to the Euros last year, in the sort of the days after the final, I was very happy because everyone was happy that we made it to back to back Euros finals. But as time kind of went on, I started to after after a couple of days, I was sitting there thinking to myself, well, actually we didn't deserve to even be in the Euros final because we hadn't played well in that tournament. To be fair. We've been, the reality of the situation is we've been relying on pot luck, the whole time and the whole way through that World Cup. And that really kind of disappointed me a little bit, the fact that we were constantly relying on pot luck, to get us through to the next round. Our performances certainly weren't world-class performances by any means, the reality is we were literally very, very close to going out in the round of 16 to Slovakia, and that would have been just as embarrassing as the Euro 20, as when we went out of the Euro 2020, Euro 2016 round of 16 against Iceland. It's going to be an exciting, a busy next 12 months for England under Thomas Tuchel. Obviously, there'll be players that come back from injury. There'll be a lot of decisions for Thomas Tuchel to make about who he does and who he doesn't take with him to the World Cup next year. I think this next year, over the next 15 months, there'll be a lot of opportunities for players to really prove themselves and show why they should be taken to the World Cup next year and why they should be in contention for a place. I mean, obviously, I'm not gonna come on and say, start bigging Thomas Tuchel up just yet, saying, oh yeah, I think he's gonna win a major tournament, he's gonna win his, his first tournament, because I'm not confident he's gonna do. I'm not gonna set my expectations too high going into the tournament for sure, because best way to avoid disappointment for me really, to me really, is not setting your expectations too high. As I always feel like if you set your expectations way too high, you're always going to be disappointed. But if you don't set your expectations so way too high, you're not going to be too disappointed. You're not going to be too bothered by the results. You're not going to be too bothered, but if they don't actually get that far, if you hadn't set your expectations that high. But the thing is, with England going into the World Cup next year, I think a lot of people are going to be setting their expectations really, really high. Um, that's what I'm assuming. I mean, I don't really know for sure how high, people's expectations are going to be going into, for England going into next year's World Cup. I know that a lot of people are hoping that, Thomas Tuchel will be able to achieve, better rates than what Gareth Southgate was able to achieve for England. And when I look at Thomas Tuchel, do I think he's a manager that had achieved more than what Gareth Southgate did? I honestly don't know. I think at this point it's way too early to kind of really to talk about that and to speculate on that because, obviously it was still early on in the qualifiers. Obviously, we've won the first two games, which I think we were always going to. We were always going to beat the likes of Albania and Latvia. This is what I was saying in the video talking about when I was obviously I did the video yesterday. I was talking about England and their qualifiers and stuff. I did say I'd like to see England play teams in the qualifiers that would provide us with a bit of a challenge. Because we've never over the last several years we've not really played anyone in qualifiers that would provide us with that bit of a challenge that we might need. Um, when I look at the England team now, I certainly wouldn't say that it's a team that can compete with the likes of France and Argentina, Portugal, you know, Brazil or whatnot. And Thomas Tuchel has a hell of a lot of work on his hands if within 15 months, to make England a team that can compete with those other big teams within the next 15 months. I would be absolutely shocked if he somehow manages to achieve that. If we go into the tournament next year and perform well, then brilliant. And I think we all hope we do. Um, but at the end of the day, I'm not gonna get too confident at the moment. Obviously, we're still over a year away from the tournament, and there's a lot of work to be done between then and June. Obviously, next summer, which is when obviously the World Cup will start, is obviously in June 2026. So obviously, it's kind of a big a big time, big gap there between now and then. Obviously, 15 months. A lot of work to be done, a lot of big decisions to be made by Thomas Tuchel. As I said, there'll be a few players who'll be back, who'll be coming back from injury, and they'll be getting looked at. There'll be a lot of competition for as to who for a place in the team at the World Cup. And it's going to be an interesting time for for England and for us as fans. Hopefully, our journey with Thomas Tuchel as manager is going to be a good one, and hopefully we will achieve great things. With Thomas Tuchel as manager, hopefully, good times lay ahead. If it ends up being next year, then brilliant. But it might not be next year. It could be waiting another 2 years, another 5 years or so before we win a trophy. It could be 6 years. It could be it could be 8 years before we win a trophy. You know, I think it will take time. I think for us to kind of for Thomas to actually take. I just feel like 15 months isn't really going to be long enough for him to transform England into a team that are going to be able to compete for major accolades. I don't want to get too, confident as such in relation to that, but it's hard not to get confident on things like that. It's hard not to be critical. I don't, Obviously, I don't like to be too critical, but that's just the way it is. So yeah, I thought I would give my thoughts on that. Hopefully you enjoyed this little video, and I'll see you for another one soon. Bye bye.